The Nigeria Labour Congress says Governor Nasir El-Rufai of Kaduna State is helping criminals by going ahead with plans to sack thousands of civil servants. The union has now embarked on an industrial action that is set to last for 5 days. Several detachments of police officers have been mobilized along the Kaduna-Abuja Expressway to boost security in anticipation of increased traffic because other means of transportation are expected to be disrupted by the strike action in the state. Arise correspondent Awal Ibrahim has been following the developments and turned in this report.
More than 40 trade unions are in Kaduna State for a 5-day warning strike in solidarity with their colleagues whose jobs are under threat. The march is being led by the national president of the Nigeria Labour Congress. Protesters are making their way from the Kaduna State NLC Secretariat to the state's House of Assembly. The unions are angry about the governor's decision to sack thousands of civil servants in both state and local government levels.
We are also aware that 11,000 workers, their list is ready. He claimed he has not reverted to 18,000. We are aware out of the 31,000 workers in the state, he did not pay 20,000 of them the April salary. In fact, in the local governments, those he paid 3 days ago, he paid 18,000 naira. These are the facts, and those workers are here to confirm. So, comrades, and the students are here. After throwing their parents out of job, he increased the school fees by 1,000%. And I have it on authority, 70% of the students of Kaduna State University are indigenous of the state. They are also children of workers, children of pensioners, children of petty traders. Yet they are now out of school because they cannot afford the school fees. What type of a system do we want to run? Is it not the same governor that benefited from public school?
Union leaders say the governor shouldn't make the security situation in the state worse by taking away a source of income from thousands of people.
Governor Rufai, if you recall, in 2017 we were here to protest against the sack of over 21,000 workers. Till today, majority of these workers have not received their payment, and he claimed then he was doing due diligence to the issue of competence tests. And then later we also discovered that he re-employed his loyalists just for purposes of replacing them, thinking he was cutting costs. And now he has started sacking the local government workers again. By the time the local government employee workers are removed, under the guise of using consultancy to control costs, this same man will return back to replace these same workers that were not due for retirement, and then that amount of victimization. So there's no way trade union will fold their hands and allow a governor who is an employer to arbitrarily remove workers without due course and due diligence to respect to the rule of law.
These women go out to do for daily bread by selling. Their shops have been destroyed totally. They are living along the streets, not to hawk. Our female workers that are affected, they are breadwinners in their houses. Their children are no longer in school. The man can walk away, but the mother can never walk away. So you see our women today having premature high BP and they are dying.
You're reducing the crime rate of the state, or you're increasing the crime rate of the state. So sometimes we need to take actions as leaders and see where these actions will lead to. We don't do it because for a personal gain, because you're happy that you're the chief executive of the state, that you do whatever you feel like doing. No, it's not like that. How many lives have you destroyed so far? And again, the same people you fired or you retrenched or you sacked from work, their children are schooling. You increase the school fees. Where will they get the money to pay the school fees that you have increased after sacking their parents from school?
And it's not just workers who are angry with the governor. Student unions want El-Rufai to reverse his decision regarding an increase in tuition fees at government institutions.
We are not going to accept it. Initially, the money we are paying, 24,000 naira, for non-indigent, 36,000 naira for non-indigent. Some of us students are unable to pay that particular money. And now you have increased the money to 170, 200, and 300. We don't want that increment. We want you to do total reversal of that increment.
The first day of this protest ended at the Kaduna State House of Assembly. It will restart on Tuesday morning and will continue until the state government reverses its decision to sack thousands of its staff. Awal Ibrahim, Arise News, Kaduna, Northwest Nigeria.
All right, welcome back, and thank you so much for that report, Awal Ibrahim. Tunu, your views on this?
Well, I am a proponent for streamlining government, but not at any cost. The manner in which we go about doing things is important. And anybody losing their job in an economy like what we have now is a really grievous issue, and it should be approached with sensitivity. I was saying yesterday that the labor unions were complaining of a violation of Section 20 of the Nigerian Labour Act, which would have required the Kaduna State government to give notice of the anticipated redundancy and the reasons for that redundancy, and to also make a payment to those being made redundant, and that has not been done. So their allegation is that it just seems really arbitrary, and also requiring people under the age of 50 or over the age of 50 to resign, and over the age the grade level 14, where the civil service rules does not state that. The age of retirement is 60, not 50. So it just seems like cruelty on the part of the government when it's handled in quite a high-handed manner without due consideration to the real struggles Nigerians are facing in our current economy, and also the knock-on effects to other residents of Kaduna that may not be directly affected by this problem. Everybody is now affected one way or another, because the labor union's actions yesterday and for the next 4 days, because they promised a 5-day warning strike, brought Kaduna to a standstill. Food prices have skyrocketed. So I really do urge the state government to go to the table and negotiate with the unions and show a little bit of sensitivity to the pains of the people right now. All right,
Dr. Bati?
Well,
okay, we'll go on a quick break, and we'll come back and we'll talk some more, Dr. Bati. All right, welcome back. Still the morning show right on the Rising Channel. Dr. Bati, you were making a point before we went to that break.
Yes, I was going to say that at the moment, Kaduna State seems to be on another kind of lockdown. You know, a lockdown occasioned by the conflict between organized labor and the state government over the plan of the state government to right ties, as Governor El-Rufai puts it, the workforce in the state. Governor El-Rufai's position is that about 84 to 96% of revenue, government revenue, is deployed to the payment of salaries. You know, if you deploy almost all your resources to the payment for overhead, then of course there will be no money left. And the solution that he has come up with is this right-sizing, downsizing of labor. Now, labor says no. The way it's been going about it does not follow due process. Labor insists that it's a violation of established rules of engagement in terms of international labor relations. And hence, organized labor, about 40 different unions, have practically shut down Kaduna State. The airport is not functioning. People traveling to Kaduna cannot get to Kaduna by rail. The electricity company, the Kaduna Disco, has shut down electricity supply. Pengasan has refused to supply fuel. So the entire state is in limbo. However, yesterday, the governor went onto his Twitter account to say that the government will not be intimidated. And Labour is saying, well, if the government will not be intimidated, the strike will continue, the shutdown will continue for the next 5 days until the government reverses itself. That's why I think dialogue is important. Now, the state government, yes, faces a dilemma, and that dilemma is not that of Kaduna State alone. Many of these states are not viable. And that's because those states are not centers of productivity. They are, pan-handling, carrying units of the Nigerian state. Every month, they will rely on Section 162, send their commissioners of finance to Abuja to go and collect money. But at the state level itself, Many of them do not have any very serious IGR, with perhaps the notable exception of Lagos State and Rivers State. And this is our argument. These states should develop as economies of their own. They should be centers of productivity so that they are not over-dependent on the center. Now, the solution that Governor El-Rufai has adopted, well, they have redefined that first part of his surname. They spelled it yesterday in a different manner. I don't want to repeat the defamation on television. You know, he has to look for more creative ways of addressing that problem. Now, if you sack, as Labour claims, over 20,000 workers in the state, okay, how many workers do they have? You are likely to appear cruel, to use Tundun's word, because this is a time when unemployment is at the highest level in the last 20 years. This is the season of COVID-19. Households have already been affected. So you are likely, the timing, in terms of timing, to create more problems. So what is the backup plan? What is the contingent plan that the Kaduna State government has to deal with the effect of that, particularly since Kaduna has become a terrorist hideout where schools have been attacked, persons have been attacked, persons have been abducted on a regular basis. I would have thought that in terms of timing, the state government probably is not being strategic enough. But there can be no other option than dialogue, than negotiating with the organized labor. Perhaps the state government is assuming that after 5 days, the people will get tired anyway, and they will return to work. That's the standard logic, that powerful authorities think about. Suppose it doesn't turn out that way. So the people who bear the brunt at the end of the day will be the people of Kaduna State. So what I think is required is creative thinking, is for the parties involved to put aside their ego, their arrogance, and try to talk to each other. Because even Waba, the NLC president, is saying that it's not just leaders of 40 labor unions that have relocated to Kaduna State, that if Nasir El-Rufai does not blink after 5 days, they can escalate the protest at a national level. So, but the good news as part of this is that the Inspector General of Police says he has deployed covert operators, he has deployed additional security to ensure, to prevent, a breakdown of law and order in Kaduna State. And I hope also that the other security agencies will also place, Kaduna State on red alert, because the governor is digging into the trenches. Labor is also saying that they will not agree. Now, that kind of situation is a prescription for chaos. And given the fact that there is terrorism, there is banditry, there is anarchy within that axis of Nigeria, the federal government also must focus on what is going on there to ensure that the situation does not go out of hand.
Thank you so much for that in-depth analysis, Dr. Abati and Tundu, for that. We'll go to our dependable Rotus Oderi to give us Africa Business Update. Over to you, Rotus. How's it going, my friend?
I think it's a fascinating economic case study. But before we get to Kaduna State, inflation figures came out yesterday about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And we saw a surprising deceleration in the figures. If you look at the top there, headline inflation, 5 basis points decrease to 18.12%. Food inflation, which has been the main driver of the numbers, it decelerated also to 22.7. To core inflation, though, when you take out volatile food items, energy and transportation and so on, that did increase to 12.7%. Even on a month-on-month basis, we saw a deceleration. So the question is, why? What happened? What caused this? Because even myself, almost everyone had predicted that inflation would inch up in Africa's largest economy. Well, it's probably two things. It could be a high base effect from last year. April of last year, we had, of course, the lockdowns that impacted food prices. You also had the impact from the closure of the borders back in August, September of 2019. So as far as the base effects, food prices spiked, you could probably say that they are leveling off at this point. However, there's also the fact that there's the dry season harvest, which began in April, and perhaps I was looking at food supplies. You can make the argument that there was a slight increase in food supplies due to the dry season harvest that just began. So between those two, you can say that, well, that's probably why we saw a deceleration. This is just, I encourage everybody to read today's This Day. Well, I encourage everybody to read This Day every day. This Day newspaper business section, which I'm biased. That's my favorite section and where I go to first before I read anything else. But in today's This Day newspaper, I believe they interviewed the head of research at, I think it was Augusto Consulting, and he said, hey, look, in the CBN's target is 9%, right? It's 18. 2 times 9 is 18. So you've got an elevated inflation levels that are still very high. I believe the headline in This Day was analysts are cautiously optimistic. However, there are still other pressures that you have to look at further down the line. There's government negotiations with labor that still continue with respect to where fuel prices, as far as deregulation is concerned. That's a headwind going down, looking ahead. There's also the, I believe in July or so, we're going to have a multi-year tariff review of power tariff. So there's still other items that could pressure inflation going forward. The MPC, you can't talk about inflation without talking about the Monetary Policy Committee, and I believe the next meeting is next week. So how does inflation impact the Monetary Policy Committee and what they plan on doing with respect to with the rates? The benchmark rate right now, 11.5%. They didn't move the rates at the last meeting. The MPC has been going with an accommodative stance. Yeah, they want to see how things work out and not want to move the benchmark rate. So could they possibly say that, well, with inflation decelerating, this means that we don't have to be hawkish and we don't have to increase the rates. We also probably don't have to be dovish and reduce the rates. So they might stay where they might keep things as is at the next meeting. So all eyes on them. I'm sure they will point out inflation, but there's still so many structural issues that we're facing with respect to inflation. So this is just a blip, in my opinion. And talking to other analysts as well. And again, please read today's This Day, the business section of today's This Day newspaper, looking at inflation. So, it's again, there's still pressure on purchasing power of the average Nigerian. There is still pressure on disposable income of the average Nigerian. There is still pressure on the real rates of return on your investments. So you're still going to have to subtract whatever you're getting on your savings accounts or capital appreciation on your stocks or yield on your money market or bond rates. You have to subtract this 18.12% inflation rate from that. Your result is a negative real rate of return. So, it surprised everybody, surprised me. But again, inflation in Nigeria is still high. In fact, this figure actually stops a trend of about 19 or 20 months of consecutive increases well, it's still an increase. It's still this is a deceleration, but upward trajectory. Next point, moving from inflation over to France. France has NNPC, excuse me. The NNPC has reported in their latest figures that 100 million liters extra of fuel was imported in the month of January. And, I have to say, if you look at, if you think about the Jonathan administration, of which, of course, Dr. Abati fondly remembers, the fuel consumption was anywhere from, I believe, 30 to 35 million liters a month. You're now seeing figures of, I think it was 90 was the last, or 70 to 90 or so was the last figure for fuel importation in the most recent report from the NNPC. That's consumption. This is different from what you're looking at here, which is importation. For an economy that hasn't grown that much, you have to question how these consumption figures have risen so much, because the economy hasn't grown that much, right? So the borders and smuggling of fuel is something that still is a serious matter that we have to address. And when you look at the subsidy issue, and this, I just talked about subsidies and government and labor negotiation and what that could mean for inflation going forward. Something has to give at some point, because fuel smuggling in Nigeria is still very serious. In fact, I think next up in Sudan, let me quickly talk about Sudan. France has I mentioned the fact that there was the high-level two-day summit that was taking place in France. In fact, today, President Buhari, Ouattara of Ivory Coast, Nana Akufo-Addo of Ghana, everybody else will be talking about, post-COVID-19 financial structure for African economies. But for yesterday, France cancelled $5 billion of debt from Sudan. You're looking at Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok. That's the Prime Minister of Sudan. They cancelled it. In fact, France is also giving they're going to give them an extra $1.5 billion in order to clear their IMF arrears for Sudan. So Macron is encouraging other economies to try to come to the aid of Sudan. They want to reintegrate Sudan back into the international economy. They've had their civil wars and so on and so forth. So it's a good move. Although, on a slightly cynical note, Macron he has elections next year. I believe it's 2022. So look at that.
And Marine Le Pen is fighting him big time. And she happens to be doing very well in the polls. But for me, I'm very skeptical and cynical about this. When will Africa learn?
France?
I'm very skeptical and cynical about what France is doing to Sudan. When will Africa learn? That should be the big question. Because, you see, that loan is not for free. How will Sudan be able to pay back that money?
No, they cancelled it. It's cancelled.
No, I'm saying that 1.5 billion.
Okay, for IMF,
For IMF, it's not for free. Well, so we still keep, wallowing in this pit. We're trying to wriggle our way through. It's just like a pig in the mud, and we try to wriggle our way through, but we come out of it. And this will also be and Reuters, research this. Every country that has gotten debt relief, it was just an incentive for them to go borrow more.
Look at Nigeria, Paris Club.
And act very stupidly.
Right.
So I don't trust it. Should this be the way? And all of these gifts don't come for free. For me, we are cautiously optimistic about the inflation numbers, Rotus. But at this point, any good news I'll take. Because we've had one too many bad news.
I'm with you.
And the cocktail is there, rising unemployment numbers 33%. So any deceleration in inflation numbers, Rotus, I'll grab it on, I'll lap it on, I'll say, good morning. Glad to be alive.
I have a slightly different opinion on the inflation figures. I was going to ask you, Rotus, to explain to me what is the difference between Okereke and Okeke. As we say here, there isn't much difference. Not much has changed. The French will say, plus ça changé, c'est la même chose. If you look at the deceleration that you talk about, maybe 0.05% in one regard, 0.99% in another regard, and then core inflation has even gone up. And, for me, the biggest measure of it is not these statistics that economics come up with. It is the reality within the community. People are still suffering. One person was telling me the other day that the Congo of rice, the amount, the price, the cost of it is now alarming. That he never thought that in his lifetime, a Congo of rice would be as much as 1,000 naira per Congo, which cannot even feed a family. An average family could, feed on a Congo of rice, as they call it in the market. So we have to look at it in terms of the impact on households, on individuals, and what did you say earlier on, people's purchasing power, and not much has changed in that regard. So, these figures, I don't think it's an opportunity for celebration yet. It's an opportunity, again, for government to do what government needs to do to make life easier and better for the people. As for the Monetary Policy Committee, they've been very cautious, they've been very careful for more than 2 years now, in an attempt to manage inflation. I do not expect that in the next MPC meeting, you are going to get any pattern that is a radical departure from previous positions that the Monetary Policy Committee had taken. As for France and Sudan, which was the summit yesterday, well, I think we should commend President Emmanuel Macron. Yeah. He's been very consistent in asking for debt cancellation, debt relief, support for African countries. In April, he was talking about New Deal for African economies. Right. And Sudan certainly needs all the help that it can get. Since the exit of the dictator, Omar Bashir, that country has been in very serious economic crisis. Last month, they had to float the Sudanese pound. So this kind of support is something that they need. The French loan, the $1.5 billion, that France is proposing to help offset Sudan's arrears with the IMF, you know, I think it's also something that should be commended, you know. But however, Sudan presents us with a clear case. All these dictators sit tight rulers in Africa. The moment they leave, what you find is crisis, right. You know, and that in itself is the bane of the leadership process in Africa. We hope right. that the Transitional Governing Council in Sudan will make the best of this opportunity, you know, and that other countries of the world, beyond the Bretton Woods institutions which have provided some support, countries like China and the United States and, you know, European countries, will also see the need to follow the example of France in this regard. And that has been one of the major issues in the context of COVID-19 and how global solidarity can be deployed to help people and to help the disadvantaged economies of the world.
Well, I don't think we have time, Rotis, so we'll talk about this tomorrow. I wanted to talk about the French oil company Total pulling out of Mozambique, a story that you brought and the update on that, but I think we'll talk about it tomorrow.
We'll do it tomorrow. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Rotis. We'll move on to business update. Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Michael, great to have you.
Good morning. Yes,
Morning,
not a lot really. Good morning. Not a lot really for the markets to focus on overnight. Nothing to get their teeth into as far as Wall Street was concerned. Commodity and precious metals doing quite well. Markets also, I think, expecting a fresh wave of consolidation after Warner Media and Discovery tied the knot. A bit more on that later on. So as far as the global overview is concerned, you've been talking about inflation. That question is it transitional? Is it sticky? That's still worrying people. US, UK, Europe vaccination access, the ensuing knee-jerk consumption hump passes. What will the world actually look like after that? What is life like after a heart attack? You don't look at people, you're not saying to them, are you going to run a 30k marathon? What you're doing is you're just wondering about how life will actually change. And we don't know anything about that, of course, because the world is still moving around at the moment. So it's hard to put your finger on anything as far as the future is concerned. As far as Asia markets specifically are concerned, COVID-19 nerves steadied yesterday. Nikkei up by 2.1%. We'll come on to Japan in a second in terms of the economy there. Fast money's been equally busy elsewhere. Kospi 2, Hong Kong. China, a modicum of calm by contrast. The lesson here is that there is an ocean of money waiting on the sidelines to buy equities as soon as there's any material pullback, COVID-19 or not, basically. Talking about Japan, yes, stock market doing well, but that's not going to be a place where inflation is going to come from any time in the future. Quarter one GDP down by 1.4%, and that will obviously deepen because what's happening there is that there are various states of emergency around the country, and after basically, the investors themselves actually thought no news is good news, so they actually got into stocks, and that pattern really was repeated across Asia. As far as the United States is concerned, a slow night. FOMC member Robert Kaplan, he raised the possibility of tapering and rate hikes in 2022. Not that much of a surprise because he's always been relatively hawkish about these kind of things. But Thursday, of course, FOMC meeting minutes we're going to get, and that could spark some sort of tantrum volatility. That's what we tend to call it now, if it's not there. But given how skittish the markets are, we're going to get US housing starts and building permits for April later today. That'll be some sort of, in other words, higher numbers equal sell equities and buy bonds and vice versa. So very binary reaction to that. Most of the elevated tariffs that were put into place against China and vice versa during the Trump administration are still there. It turns out that this is not particular inflation at the moment. US importers are absorbing more than 90%, it turns out, of additional costs resulting from the 20% tariffs, and US exporters are absorbing most of the costs it costs them to export into China. A note this morning that waiving intellectual property protections for COVID-19 vaccinations is more political theory. theatre. That's from the head of a biopharmaceutical company in Massachusetts, saying that it is about political theatre. It doesn't really help because the safe and effective vaccines are very, very difficult to make, and so on. So, in other words, I think what he's trying to say is that it's an expensive process in any case. Now, about the media section, the latest one this morning, Amazon apparently, according to reports, is in talks to acquire MGM. That's the film studio, as you know, behind the James Bond franchise. MGM, one of the few Hollywood studios not to have been gobbled up by a larger conglomerate. And so on. So I think that it is also one of Hollywood's most famous studios, Leo the Lion logo and so on, you know, in that part of the history. And it would give the tech giant, it give Amazon's prime streaming service a huge access to a catalogue of iconic content. And of course, this comes hours just after Warner Discovery and Warner Media.
Hi, Michael.
And putting pressure on Viacom, CBS and NBC Universal. World Economic Forum is cancelling its 2021 meeting plan for Singapore because of you-know-what. It may resume in 2022. The EU is set to finalise plans for digital passports today. That'll help travel for us. It'll help. And it looks like there's going to be a rejigging of countries onto the so-called green list that the EU has. That is which one can travel to, including the UK and the US. Main focus in the UK, the jobs numbers just out. Unemployment fell down very slightly from 4.9 to 4.8. Very, very slightly indeed. It's sort of improving slightly, but the pandemic has not struck job vacancies. They're at the highest level for 12 months. Pounds look relatively strong, but it's clear the continuation of the furlough scheme is actually masking what is really happening in the jobs market. We've drawn attention to that in the past. Now we get freedom. We've had freedom on June the 21st. We're going to get freedom to actually go about our normal businesses. That, of course, is now up in a big question mark behind that because of the India variant. And it may be that political caution, which causes that date to be pushed further into the year, will hold back recovery in this country. So political concerns actually holding back what the rest of us want to do, which is actually get out. But the easing of COVID concerns yesterday, these are quick figures that have just come out this morning, did not force people back into the shops. In fact, about 30% lower was the number. That's by Springboard. Springboard are quite well known here as gauging footfall into shops and so on. That hasn't worked. Now, I wonder if you like ice cream like we do. You talk about what our favourite habits are in this country. You talk to me about fish and chips. Well, they sort of are, but ice cream most certainly is. And everybody's been after ice cream, and it's caused a shortage. When you have them, we call them 99 here, but you put a little stick of chocolate in the ice cream in the corner, like that's delicious. Apparently, people are actually worried about this now. There's a big Cadbury's particularly worried about a big flake shortage. It's a national emergency, I tell you. Commodities, oil prices bouncing slightly higher. The IEA is saying it's saying that no new oil or gas field need to be approved for development because we have enough fossil fuels to last us into their net zero target of 2050. I suspect that some countries who rely on oil industries will have a lot to say about that. It's just a scenario. Observers are saying it's not a prediction, but it's quite important that the IEA is actually saying that. And gold's really outperformance, well, you know, gold increases in intrinsic value to the markets when we get inflation jitters, as we've had today. That's your global view.
Amazing time for oil. Can the glut be the reason, can the glut in the oil market in general, not exploring new oil fields, be the reason for that sweet spot the oil prices hit and possibility of increasing in numbers? Because as at this morning, it's still about that 68 BPD range, 68 USD BPD range. And so can the glut be the reason for the fact that we've maxed out on the production fields, nothing can happen any longer? And I want to talk about tariffs. You talked about the fact that the tariffs from Donald Trump's era are still in place for China. But America seems to have been able to do a deal with the Eurozone to be able to stall the regime of tariffs. Can you tell me all about the backdoor horse trading as regards that?
talk about oil first of all. Remember what the IEA is saying is only a scenario. They have no power whatsoever. And actually, they have not really been consistent over the years. But what they're saying is, I mean, glut or no glut, there is no need for any more fossil fuel development anywhere in the world right now. And so they're saying they're trying to encourage governments, because we've got this big thing coming up in this country, COP21 coming up towards the end of the year, when lots of people will actually get together. But we haven't heard OPEC's comments about that, and we haven't heard from oil producers. And the IEA are merely proposing this as a scenario. They're saying that they want to get to net zero by 2050. I've said in the past, I've seen no costings for that domestically at the nitty-gritty level, like, will we here be swapping our oil boiler for something else, a gas boiler or a hydrogen boiler? Doubt it very much indeed. Will somebody paying for that? No. Who'll be paying for that? Joe here will be paying for it. You know, it's all that stuff, really, which is actually very small indeed. As far as tariffs are concerned, I just drew your attention to those figures because it looks like nothing has been relaxed. I suspect it probably will. I still feel that China wants its place at the high table, and it does not do that by having a standoff with the world's major powers. I was merely pointing out that what was happening there is that both importers and exporters in the United States are at the moment absorbing the extra costs of those tariffs themselves. That's quite an important figure. Whether they will continue to do that in the future, we don't know. So far, the Joe Biden administration has not reversed anything at all. All it said is we're open to discussion, but you know, that's discussion, that's politics for you, isn't it? Political theatre, if you will.
I want to take you back to the MGM Studios deal, or reported deal, that Amazon is considering offering $9 billion, a snip, obviously, for MGM. But is it worth it now, with Netflix shares being reported as sliding and that lockdown boom being over? I mean, I would say it is, because I'm a huge fan of the movies, but really, from the bottom line perspective, is it worth it?
Yeah. Do you know what? The media business, I think, makes it up as it goes along, quite honestly. I don't know. You ask a very good question. I don't know whether it's worth that or not. I, like you, like going to the movies. I, like you, look forward to that sort of back catalogue of those amazing MGM films that we sort of enjoyed when we were very, very much younger, as I did.
And now I can watch them again.
Well, quite. You know, I just don't know how that competition will happen. All that I think has emerged from this, never mind what's going to happen in the future, I draw your attention back to AT&T, which splashed out a huge amount of money, $85 billion, for its Time Warner acquisition only 3 years ago. And now they had a complete U-turn. They're actually letting go any kind of streaming ability and the rest of it, and concentrating on technology. I think that's the big headline, really, from all this. Amazon, whether MGM's worth it, I honestly don't know. I remember interviewing Rupert Murdoch many, many, many years ago when he was buying Fox, and I asked him the same question, and he said to me then, "I think it probably is." Fair enough.
Michael, I was going to talk to you about self-driving car legislation that the House of Representatives in the U.S. is considering. Automatic vehicles. We're told that some companies, Wayne and another company, they are bringing out automatic vehicles that will be self-driving. And Frederick Logan, I think that's his name, Greg Reagan, the head of the Transportation and Trade, is saying, look, this will pose a threat to jobs, and that there should still be human beings inside those automated vehicles. But for me, here in Africa, hearing that, you know, I'm concerned. Automated self-driving vehicles with the chaos that we have on the roads. I mean, I just thought, has technology gone mad, you know, in that regard? And then as for AT&T, yes, they want to do, they want to further consolidate. They're merging their media operations. But how strategic is that? Considering that the fact that that company, AT&T, is heavily in debt, and they are far, far behind Netflix, Disney, and even Amazon.
Okay, self-driving cars. Yes, I share your worries about self-driving cars. You talk about your roads in chaos. You should come and have a look at ours, particularly in London. I mean, what's happened there, and never mind the pandemic. I mean, when people start to get back to work again, the same sort of chaos will continue. They can't even say that they will have gas repairs one week and then telephone line laying another week and fiber optic cable another, so there is no coordination whatsoever in road planning. I don't see how automated vehicles, unless they have very, very clever technology, are going to get over that. Personally, I prefer one hand on the steering wheel. My neighbor who's got a Tesla electric car is allowed in this country now to drive with one hand on the steering wheel. In the United States, you're allowed to drive with automated cars, as I understand it, in some states with no hands on the steering wheel. Well, I tell you what, I don't trust technology that far, Doctor. I really don't. I'm like you. I see chaos, and it worries me. It worries me hugely. As far as AT&T is concerned, again, as I said, I do find the media business a bit of a mystery, but it can move fairly quickly. All I would say is AT&T, yeah, good that they're now consolidating. It is a U-turn. Will that CEO last? I doubt it very much indeed. They made a big decision. It was the wrong one. Now they're reversing it.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael. It is what it is. It's media anyway. For updates on COVID-19 pandemic, Adeso Moro is here with us. Adeso, great to have you. Good morning.
Thank you, Rufai. Good morning, guys. Less than 300,000 coronavirus infections were recorded in the last 24 hours globally. And of course, about 5,500 deaths were also recorded. So we're seeing a decline in global output. However, you do know that cases are spiking in some regions. Now, the total from the last 24 hours pushes the global total to what you have on your screen. Remember, the green figures are the vaccination numbers globally. Africa accounts for about 1% of that, Asia about 5%, and you can do the maths for the rest of the world. Well, here in Nigeria, according to official data, 69 new infections were recorded in 4 states. Ondo State in southwest Nigeria posted the most, with 35 infections in the last 24 hours. Now, 11,300 people were also vaccinated against the COVID-19, the coronavirus in Nigeria. That's according to the NPH-CDA data. That's pushing the national total to 1.82 million people that have received their first jab. To the U.S., where President Joe Biden has announced the U.S. will share 80 million vaccine doses globally over the next 6 weeks, and that's 5 times more than any other country has shared to date. The 80 million doses will include 20 million doses of the Moderna, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and then 60 million AstraZeneca, once the AstraZeneca vaccine is authorized by the U.S. FDA. Now, it is not clear which countries are receiving these vaccines, but it comes at a time when 60% of Americans are reported to have received at least one shot. It's definitely a right step in the right direction, but it's also a drop in the ocean. I could use a pizza analogy. Imagine 80 million slices of pizza for over 7 billion people who need perhaps 2 doses. There's been reaction from the WHO. The DG hailed the news, reiterating that solidarity is the only way to save lives and livelihoods everywhere. Now to Taiwan. Taiwan is banning foreigners from entering the island following a surge in COVID-19 cases. More than 300 infections were reported on Monday alone in a country that has reported just over 2,000 infections since the beginning of the pandemic. Now, new social distancing measures are being introduced. Restriction measures are also put in place. The ban will be effective from May 19th to June 18th and will be adjusted on a rolling basis based on the status of the pandemic and effectiveness of those measures. Taiwan had not had to impose lockdown since the pandemic because they've had an effective case tracing and, of course, border closure. And finally, to India, where 90,000 Indian doctors with medical degrees from Russia, China, and Ukraine are urging the government to let them help the fight against the COVID-19 crisis in the country. They are waiting on local licenses before being allowed to practice and are asking the authorities to fast-track their permits. Now, the plea is coming despite warnings that India would soon face a shortage of medical staff in critical care units. And as the country suffered its deadliest day of the pandemic in the last 24 hours with over 4,300 deaths. Now, graduates from overseas medical schools, including Bangladesh, Philippines, Nepal, and Kazakhstan, have to pass local exams in India before they are allowed to practice.
Yes, in India, yes, you have to get a local license. I know that in a country which in May, early part of May, was even stopped deploying final year medical students, deploying, medical doctors who were writing examinations to come and join the race to address a national emergency. You would then be worried to say, well, fully qualified, medical doctors from neighboring countries, from foreign countries. They even have an association of foreign-trained medical doctors.
Yes.
In India. You would think that they would be allowed. But you see, this is about standards. In India, the standard is that if you train abroad, you must get local license. And I guess, the thing to say in this regard is that you cannot be too careful where healthcare is involved. You may say it's discriminatory, as the Association of Foreign Trained Doctors are saying, and considering the emergency situation, over 400,000 infection rate cases per day, and about 4,000 deaths per day. That's alarming. But that's the situation in India. Maybe there will be need to reconsider it. Now, as for the United States, yes, what we're dealing with here is vaccine diplomacy. And President Biden had made vaccination his major priority with the promise that 60% of adult Americans will be fully immunized by July 4, so that America can properly celebrate on that special day for the country. But yes, you think it's small, 60 million, 20 million, but I think it's a welcome contribution.
It is.
And the point made by President Biden that, look, solidarity is important. Nobody is safe until everyone is safe. That's the refrain. But other countries should also make their contribution. And you recall that the United States had sent oxygen cylinders to India,
yes,
and has also promised to provide support for other countries in Africa. The 20 million doses of AstraZeneca, which is not applied in the United States, was the first intervention internationally by the United States. But the question to also ask is the United States, in this regard, vaccine diplomacy, also competing with Russia and China, two countries that seem to have been using vaccine diplomacy to expand global influence. Finally, Tanzania. You'll recall that President Magufuli was hiding data, in fact, suspended the reporting. The first thing that President Suluhu Hassan did was to set up a committee, and that committee has now provided a report. And that report is progressive in my view, and it shows that under President Suluhu Hassan, we're likely to see a different dispensation with regard of management of COVID-19 in Tanzania.